Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuning in the world. My name is Michelle Ragusa McBain, and I am the VP of Global Channels and Alliances at Corero. And I'm very excited to have with me today Teresa Carlin, and we're going to talk about a very important thing that everyone really should be listening into. And the title of our session today is Your Network is Already a Target, the DDoS Threat Reality of 2026. I'll be your host today, but really, we have a few quick housekeeping items before we dive in. This session is being recorded and will be available for all registrants within 48 hours. Your microphones are muted, so please let's keep this interactive and drop your questions into the Q&A panel at any time, and we'll get to them as we can. We have a lot to cover, and so let's make the most of our time together. Now, I could give you a long list of stats to explain why DDoS matters right now. But honestly, the person sitting next to me virtually has lived it in the data, in the alerts, and in the 2 a.m. SOC calls. We're very sorry, Teresa. I am joined by Teresa Carlin, threat research leader here at Corero Network Security. Teresa has spent 12 years at Corero and 30 years in network and security, as she is frankly the mastermind behind the 2026 Threat Intelligence Report that is the foundation of everything we're going to discuss today. And you must have started at 5 years old, which is very impressive. Teresa, welcome. We're really glad to have you here.
Thanks, Michelle. It's great to be here, and I'll be honest. Unfortunately, like the data from last year really makes it a very easy discussion to have.
Well, that's great. I mean, we had it recently, our Security Leadership Summit in Edinburgh, and you really enlightened our audience. So let's start at the top. The Threat Intel report has a subtitle: The Year Every Record Became the New Normal. That's a strong statement for someone tuning in who hasn't maybe taken the DDoS look closely. What does that phrase actually mean in practice?
So yeah, after all these years in my job, obviously you develop a feel for like what looks normal versus like temporary spikes that are likely to settle back down. Um, 2025 really didn't settle down, and by the middle of the year, my team really kind of stopped comparing what we were used to seeing in prior months and started thinking more about what was theoretically possible. Attack sizes that maybe would have triggered all hands alerts in 2024 were happening with enough regularity that we had to kind of change our thoughts on what the normal looked like. And those new baselines have just kept on moving.
Wow. So when you say records, give us the headline numbers. What are we talking about?
Um, so yeah, peak attack sizes jumped about 262%, like year on year. Attacks hit 2.7 terabits per second, and there's lots of reports where they're much higher than that. And since February this year, we've been seeing TCP SYN attacks hitting like over 1.3 billion packets per second. So we've also started to see an increase in pulse attacks. So these are like terabit bursts, for example, that just last for a few seconds and then repeat. Um, and another observation was that our customers saw an average of 12.3 attacks like in per day, which is like the sharpest single rise in a decade.
Wow. Those numbers are extraordinary. And I want to make sure that our audience understands what we have here. So let's take a step back before we go deeper into 2025. There's a section in the report called Evolution of Revolution. And Teresa, walk us through some of the history, because I think that that context really matters here.
Yeah, definitely. So DDoS in its most basic form has been around for about 30 years. But for most of that time, the change has been like really slow and gradual. So the first like toolkits like Trinu and TFM, which came about in the late 90s, were like really basic. So at that time, there wasn't any purpose-built defense devices or mechanisms to handle this. Like your only option like really was to call your ISP and hope that they could help you. And I can actually remember doing that.
Mhm. Wow. And then it starts escalating.
Right, so in 2000s, that brought some new improvements in tools. Like, so they started to be more modular in design, and they had some more attack types. So we also started to see additional motives for attacks, such as notoriety, demonstrated by like high-profile attack types, like on Yahoo and Amazon, for example. But also we started to see geopolitical motives arising, like Estonia in 2007, where government and banking websites were targeted. So also around this time, we start to see the first like really dedicated security appliances appear. So we're talking about firewalls and IDS and IPS. We also start to see cloud scrubbing services like Prolexic and Arbor start to offer mitigation services. So this is really where DDoS became a visible and reported like board level problem.
So, what changed in the 2010s?
The big changes here were some new attack types and new tools. So, centered around amplification, we see NTP, SSDP, DNS, Memcached, for instance. And this is really where Corero came into play, and we launched our smart wall product. So, the difference with this was that it offered real time inline mitigation, because it was clear like that the model of detecting and rerouting wasn't always fast enough. Um, in 2016, also we had Mirai make its appearance, and of course, like the source code was exposed for that. Mirai was and still pretty much takes center stage. And we also start to enter the Internet of Things age around here too.
Right.
So suddenly devices designed for convenience, but often somewhat lacking on the security side, which were like easy to compromise, such as cameras, routers, digital video recorders. These are all being weaponized. And this is where we saw DDoS like cross the 1 terabit per second barrier for the first time back in 2018.
Wow. And what drove the acceleration in the last few years specifically?
Um, so yeah, I see this acceleration as being down to like 4 areas really. So firstly, motive, geopolitical instability, so hacktivism,
Mm.
commercial disruption. These all are feeding the cyber ecosystem simultaneously. Secondly, widespread infection, an endlessly growing supply of devices that are available to compromise, so particularly IoT. Um, and increasingly efficient ways of finding them. So, like with easy to run internet scans. There still remain like many old devices out there running outdated and unpatched software. And of course, there's plenty of devices which have unchanged like default credentials. So, thirdly, technique innovation. AI is starting to play a real role here. And then lastly, greater accessibility. So DDoS as a service for as little as like €5 a month,
Wow.
available through the likes of Telegram and many other similar platforms. So any one of those areas accelerates the problems, but all four together is what's really made the last 2 years feel like a break from the past.
Wow, that's incredible. So let's dig into the technique innovation piece, particularly AI, the buzzword of 2026, 2025, and the future, because I think that's the one that really tweaks people's interests the most right now.
Yeah. So, yeah, AI is accelerating everything. It's accelerating the threat landscape in all directions. Uh, so, on the attack side, finding vulnerabilities, we're probably all aware of Mythos, and it's likely brief moments before these capabilities were available to a wider audience. AI is also assisting tasks such as scanning for targets, coordinating attacks, and of course, actually building the malware itself. So, attackers use AI to monitor and adapt to changes in defenses as they see them, and they're doing that in real time. Also, the forensic breadcrumbs that investigators relied on in the past, such as like language patterns or coding quirks, they're all fading fast. On top of that, DDoS for hire services are increasingly more professional looking, they're cheap and easy to use, and importantly, easy to hide behind.
And from a defense perspective?
Yeah, so we need to use AI too. Thresholds need to be dynamic, detection must be sub-second, and of course for behavioral analysis. But this all comes with risk. So AI in defense, it's needed to speed up innovation, but we also have to retain those abilities to create real human experts too.
Mm.
If we automate everything and nobody understands what the automation is doing, we've created a different kind of vulnerability.
That's really well said. I equate AI, fun interlude, to a very excited intern that often makes mistakes. I leveraged AI this weekend to recreate my family on a roller coaster, including our pets, and it gave my daughter a cat's arm. So clearly, we're not fully comprehended there yet. But that's a really important point. So, okay, let's bring it to the present. Tell us what's actually dominating the threat landscape right now.
Um, yeah, so these days, botnets are the engine of everything. Mirai is still very prominent with many variants out there and it's widely deployed. But the story of 2025 really was Aisuru and its Android focused variant, Kimwolf.
Tell us about Aisuru because it comes up repeatedly in the threat intel report, and I want our audience to understand the differences.
So, yeah, Aisuru first appeared in the second half of 2024. Um, like many others, it targeted home routers, CCTV cameras, DVR, MVR, broadly like IoT. It exploited multiple CVEs, including remote code execution and command injection vulnerabilities. So there's nothing too different there. But then Kimwolf, which was the Android focused variant, and that emerged around a year later and went after the likes of TV boxes and smart TVs.
Mm.
So Kimwolf exploited misconfigurations such as ADB interfaces, which were open to the internet, and weak authentication. And also via supply chains in the form of like malware, which was embedded in software apps, so such as Byte Connect. So by the last quarter of 2025, it was estimated that between 1 and 4 million devices were associated with that botnet, meaning that peak attack sizes in that period ran 40 to 50% above the first half average for the year. Like that's the scale that we've been dealing with.
Wow. And so law enforcement did act against Aisuru. Does that mean it's over?
No, and this is the part people don't always appreciate. So the compromised devices, they're all still out there. So the same device that was part of a Mirai botnet can be recompromised by Aisuru and then by the next botnet. The end devices, they don't get cleaned when a botnet is taken down. So there's always like a next contender, like ready to inherit that infrastructure. So takedowns are really important, but they're not the end of the story.
And with that kind of infrastructure, what are the actual attack vectors that are being deployed?
So, yeah, the protocols used since the creation of the internet remain largely unchanged. And mostly the attack vectors themselves haven't changed too much either. But what has changed is like the scale, the combinations, and the creativity in how they're abused. So TCP, UDP, DNS reflection and amplification, there's nothing much new there. They're all like based on the fundamentals that remain the same, but the execution is dramatically more sophisticated.
So let's go through specific vectors, starting with TCP SYNAC reflection, which your data shows has been climbing for 2 years now.
Yeah, so TCP SYNAC, that was the workhorse vector of 2025. So this is high packet rates, small but correctly formed packets distributed across like multiple lots of subnets. The goal is overwhelming both bandwidth and CPU simultaneously. We saw particularly high concentrations in LATAM with ISPs frequently targeted. You've probably read the articles surrounding huge networks. What makes SYNAC especially difficult to mitigate is that it uses legitimate, well known sources as reflectors. So you can't just block those IPs. If you do, then that's going to break real traffic too. So distinguishing malicious traffic, which looks identical and comes from legitimate source IPs, remains one of the hardest problems in this space.
And the big sin problem or pattern that you've highlighted that's new.
Um, yeah, so under normal conditions, TCP SYN packets, they're usually very small and they don't usually carry data.
Mm.
What we've been observing uses like very large packets. On February the 20th this year, an event reached like 1.3 billion packets per second as well.
And what about UDP? You describe little and large in the report. I love that framing.
Yeah, so little UDP attacks are what we're referring to there are floods of small packets which have got various small packet lengths, and they're distributed across lots of source and destination ports with payloads as small as like 1 byte of data. Pattern-based filtering is extremely difficult because there's no consistent signature. And the goal here, again, is CPU exhaustion. And on the other side of that, we've got large UDP attacks, which are the opposite, oversized packets with large set payload lengths, and they're being carpet bombed across like multiple IP subnets. And they've got randomized payload. Again, signature detection is almost useless. Both of these are designed to make the defender's life as hard as possible in different ways, and they're increasingly like sent at the same time.
So in DNS, you call it trusted protocol weaponized.
DNS keeps working as an attack vector because of what it is. It's trusted, it's everywhere. And blocking DNS traffic from well-known infrastructure means breaking legitimate services. DNS combined with TCP vectors was the most common like combination that we tracked. Over 102,000 attacks. So some individual campaigns also combined like more than 60 like unique vectors just in one event.
And so the attackers, they know how that DNS filtering creates collateral damage. They exploit that. I want to spend some time with you on the multi-vector topic because I think it represents a genuine shift in how attacks work. In the report section, multi-vector campaigns, the subtitle is Attacks That Adapt. Can you explain what actually looks like from your SOC point of view?
Yes, so single vector DDoS is increasingly rare. What we see now are campaigns that evolve like while they're ongoing. An attacker starts with one vector and then they watch to see how the defenses respond, and then they adjust. So we're talking about shifting to different protocols, changing the packet size, or adding multiple vectors all at the same time. So they probe and adapt faster than most detection systems can like reclassify that. We've seen, like as we've said already, 50 plus vectors in a single campaign with TCP SYN variants, UDP floods across multiple port combinations, ACK floods, reset floods, FIN floods, fragmented UDP. They're all running concurrently. Defending against one type at a time, that doesn't work anymore.
Okay, so I guess the strong defenses today mean being able to mitigate diverse attack types in parallel in real time.
Exactly.
Mm.
Um, and there's a connection to small attacks we see as well. So a third of like the sub 1 gigabit attack are actually under 100 megabits per second. So those levels today are like invisible on many of the dashboards. But they aren't just like random noise. These are attackers learning how your defenses work. So they're testing response thresholds, mapping your infrastructure. Like the small attacks that you dismiss are often the recon of the big one.
Mm. Which leads perfectly to pulse attacks. This is the one that when I read this data stopped me cold. 6 seconds. So when you think about that, 6 seconds, what can happen in 6 seconds? One raindrop can fall to the earth. A cheetah can run 1 kilometer. A hummingbird can flap its wings thousands of times. It's not a very large amount of time, but it's long enough that your entire customer's network can be taken down. That's huge.
Yeah, yeah. 6 seconds was the shortest wave we observed in February this year, with waves between 6 and 38 seconds, and they're repeated in succession. So you get no ramp up and no window for any manual intervention or time to reroute traffic.
So walk us through the math because I think people hear 6 seconds and they don't immediately grasp the damage that can occur.
Okay, yeah. So at 1 terabit per second, a 10-second attack delivers 1.2 terabytes of traffic. On a 10 gigabit per second link, that's complete saturation, like several times over. When you think about SLAs, a provider delivering 5 nines availability equates to just 26 seconds of allowable downtime per month. So if each pulse attack causes 6 seconds of unmitigated exposure, it doesn't take long to exhaust like the entire monthly budget.
Wow. And what are the implications for how we need to build defenses to deal with this?
Yeah, so you don't fight a 6 second attack. Like you either had protection in place before that attack started or you didn't.
Mm.
My team no longer really focus on reacting faster, but rather that making sure that the required detection and mitigation are already active and don't need a human to engage that. So at the speeds we're seeing now, if a person needs to be involved in the decision, you're too late already.
So absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that Corero prides itself on, sub-second mitigation and being there left of boom. So let's zoom out for the full volume picture. Take us through what the data shows.
Yeah, every single month in 2025 outpaced the same month in 2024. By November, peak sizes hit 2.7 terabits per second, which is more than 4 times the highest monthly peak from the year before. Also, the frequency climbed too. As we said, 12 attacks per customer per day on average, which was up 12% from 2024. When you add in the fact that since 2021, daily attack frequency has climbed 25%, it demonstrates that that's a sustained and accelerating trend.
And the size distribution. I know it's not all terabit scale.
Yeah, over 96% of attacks remain under 10 gigabits per second, but the share exceeding that level has nearly doubled since 2021, equating to a 72% increase in the proportion of large attacks over 5 years. However, duration is collapsing. So nearly 91% of attacks in 2025 lasting less than 10 minutes, and attacks lasting over an hour actually fell fairly significantly. So this signifies shorter, faster, and more automated.
And your research showed that many attacks come back within a week.
Yeah, so nearly a third, and it's not random. These are repeat campaigns. The first attack you see is like it's rarely the last one.
So what's driving all of this volume escalation? Is it purely botnet size?
It's compounding factors, larger botnets, more efficient reflection techniques, multi-vector campaigns, and of course AI assisting on the attacker side. The volume ceiling hasn't been found. There's nothing in the data to suggest like that's plateaued. The question for any organisation isn't really whether they'll face volumes at this scale; it's more when.
Mm. And so, Teresa, I want to pivot to something that I think is the hardest conversation in this space because everyone in the audience listening in has a defense architecture, whether that's cloud scrubbing, on premise appliance, or some combination of the two. And the data in your report essentially puts pressure on all of them. How do you frame the challenge they're facing?
Yeah, the data definitely puts pressure on every deployment model, not just like one type. Pulse attacks challenge any architecture that depends on traffic rerouting because those short bursts are over like before the traffic has time to finish rerouting. Multi-vector campaigns challenge any architecture that relies on sequential detection, and these massive volumetric peaks they challenge architectures with fixed local capacity. So pick any single layer approach, and this report has um, a data point that breaks that.
And the cloud scrubbing piece specifically, you have a very stark way of putting this.
Yeah, as attacks grow into the terabit range, but customer access links remain in the 1 to 10 gigabit range, mitigation has to be like more accurate and near to perfect, because even like half a percent of residual traffic from one of these large attacks will saturate that uplink. A 1 terabit per second attack against a customer on 1 gigabit per second link requires like 99.9% mitigation effectiveness just to keep the link clear. So the margin for error is like shrinking towards zero.
Wow. So in cloud scrubbing scenarios, which deliver this high level accuracy, is generally not going to be good enough at those scales. So this volatility issue is compounding that.
Yeah, so year over year, the number of like cloud swings has risen, and that volatility creates like baseline traffic in which it's harder to be able to distinguish between a legitimate like increase from an attack spike. So you're really working against an increasingly unpredictable backdrop.
So what's the answer? Because I don't want our audience to leave here feeling like there's no good options left.
Yeah, for me, the answer is integration. The industry has treated this as a binary choice, so cloud or on-prem, scalability or granularity, remote capacity or local speed. But what actually matters is whether your mitigation is fast enough and whether it can handle multiple vectors simultaneously. So no single deployment model solves all of that. The organizations that are like best positioned are the ones which combine edge level inline protection with cloud scale capacity, and those that are also willing to share intelligence and to integrate between systems. That's the direction the industry is moving, and the data in the report is shows exactly why that is.
And the question every organization should be asking themselves right now is what?
So not where do we send traffic to be cleaned? A better question that would be, can our architecture handle attacks that are simultaneously fast, large, and complex? Like most organizations haven't really tested that scenario, but like attackers have.
So before we go to questions, I'd like to close the expert part of our session with some key takeaways. I'm going to go through each one of those and ask you to put in plain terms our audience. Are you ready?
Go for it.
Okay. Takeaway one, pulse attacks. The sub 10-second pattern isn't a novelty.
And no, it's a stress test of the entire defense ecosystem. If you have built your architecture with the assumption that there is time to detect and then reroute and then scrub, then you're going to have problems. This pattern is becoming more common.
Okay. Takeaway two, botnets will appear, evolve, and expand.
Aisuru saw massive monthly growth rates before it was taken down earlier this year, but all of the devices using the botnet are still out there in the same condition they were when they were initially compromised.
Mm.
There's always a next botnet. The compromised devices in someone's home, they don't suddenly get fixed when the botnet operators get arrested.
Just shifts to the next one. So, takeaway three, the volume ceiling hasn't been found.
The volume rose 262% in a single year with no plateau in sight, caused by all the things we've discussed. So, botnet proliferation, DDoS as a service, and AI assisted tooling. I think we can probably expect that 2026 is going to exceed 2025.
Logically. And takeaway four, geopolitical instability fuels the ecosystem. And I just want to say before you go on to this is I look at the state of the world right now in our geopolitical climate, and many of our partners are saying, many of our customers saying, maybe I don't feel comfortable putting all of my public information in the cloud right now.
Yeah. So, yeah, as long as these tensions persist, like the DDoS ecosystem has just got a steady supply of motivation and funding and talent.
Mm. And takeaway five, multi-vector complexity is climbing.
Yeah, again, these attacks where we see lots of simultaneous vectors, this is now the normal. Testing methodologies and benchmarks need to catch up with that. Most organizations are still testing like with a single vector flood. That tells you almost nothing about the real world resilience.
And the final takeaway, the one that ties everything together.
So size, speed, and adaptability converging together. Any one of those alone is manageable, but all three compounding each other is the qualitatively different category of problem that we're facing now. So a 2.7 terabits attack arriving in 6-second bursts while cycling through 50 vectors isn't just more of the same, it's new, and AI is accelerating the attacker side of that equation like every day.
Teresa, thank you genuinely. This kind of session makes people take a hard look at their own infrastructure, and I think that's exactly the right outcome. We've got a few more minutes for questions from the audience because we started 1 minute late, thanks to me, so my apologies. Let me pull from the Q&A panel and see if we have any questions. Let's see here. From the first question, from a customer perspective, I'm trying to understand where the line between general network security and dedicated DDoS protection is. If an organization has a mature security stack in place, firewalls, IDS, IPS, endpoint security, SIEM, SOC monitoring, etc., would you consider them adequately protected against modern volumetric protocol and application layer DDoS attacks?
Absolutely not. No, from personal experience, we're talking about huge volumes here. So yeah, it like generally that isn't gonna, for me, a firewall and that kind of IPS IDS device, they're not going to be able to stack up to the levels of packets per second that we're seeing here.
Okay, we have another question that's come in. A lot of our audience are running cloud-only security scrubbing today. What's the single most important thing they should do this week based on what you've shared?
I think you need to be looking at what your SLAs are here. You know, you need to understand if they can give you a number like above 99.9, because at 1 terabits per second plus, and with those pulse attacks, you've got to be, you know, that's where you're going to have the issue. So cloud scrubbing is valuable, but the issue is how long it takes to reroute.
I have another question that just came in. You mentioned that the same compromised devices are getting reused. Is there anything the industry can actually do about that in the long term?
So yeah, this is a difficult one. At the kind of organizational level, obviously making sure you patch your own devices, and you understand your estate, understand what is coming out of and across your network. At the industry level, it's harder. ISP level filtering, coordinated takedowns, regulatory pressure on device manufacturers for better security defaults. But really, like, the honest answer here is that there's just millions of legacy devices and they're all going to remain exploitable for years. So defense really has got to be built on that assumption and not on the hope that the device pool is going to get cleaned up.
Okay, and we'll take one final question here. You mentioned small sub 200 Mbps attacks used for reconnaissance. Should we be treating those differently in our monitoring? Is that megabytes per second?
Yeah. So, well, yeah. So, well, don't dismiss them just as noise. I mean, if you're seeing a pattern of low volume probes from a similar source ranges or subnets, then it's probably reconnaissance behavior. So I would suggest analyze it and make sure your detection platform is surfacing it. The small attack is often the like preview of the large one.
That's a really valid point. The smaller attack is often a preview for the larger one. So having preparation before the attack happens is critical. Okay, I love this. Thank you so much, Teresa, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. A few final notes before we let you go. Our full 2026 Threat Intelligence Report is available for download. If you click on the exclamation point there, you can download the link. You absolutely should read this. Make sure that everybody in your security organization reads this. Make sure your customers are reading it so that they understand what is happening and you can help make them prepared. The recording will be available within 48 hours, and we'll make sure that you have a copy via email for everyone who registered. If you'd like to discuss your specific environment with our team, You can book time at our scheduling link, which should also be placed in the comments. And we'd love to hear your feedback. So please take 60 seconds to complete the post-webinar survey. We really want to know what's working, what's not, and how we can continually improve to give you the information you need to be successful. Our goal here in our organization is to help you add that layer of security in your stack of solutions to ensure that you have business resiliency and uptime availability. Our platform can help you provide that, but make sure that you're aware of the threats, because that's how you can navigate against them. From Teresa and I and the entire team at Corero, thank you and stay safe out there. Take care.
Thank you.